Hello, everyone. I'm Raj Changadoo. This is Property Investing 2.0, and my guest today is Jackie Tomes. Jackie is the founder of Tomes Homes and Property Strategy. She started Tomes Homes in 2013 when she went through 18 months of working two jobs to create the first deposit needed to buy that first investment property. These days, the company buys blocks of flats and focuses on customer and tenant satisfaction in an aim to make renting better than owning. Her other company, Property Strategy, does exactly what it says on the tin. It works with other property investors to improve their systems, processes, and strategies within their business. We are lucky to have Jackie here with us today. Jackie, hello and welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on. Great to be here.
Good, no problem, no problem. Jackie, we were just talking before we started pressing record that you are lucky enough not to be in the UK right now. Where are you calling from? Where are you tuning in from right now?
So right now, I am in Cape Town in South Africa. Feeling very jammy. Literally just slipped on out there just before the lockdown came in November, and yeah, just running, living our life out here. It's fun.
Yeah, you've been out there since November. Like you said, you've become a bit digital nomad. So
Digital nomad. I've never really said it out loud before. I feel like I'm making this admission to myself. I am one of those people.
well, last year, how long did you spend? You said in the Alps. How long were you out there for?
We spent a total of 5 months in total in the French Alps last year and 2 months in Italy. So, yeah, not much in the UK. I'm more French right now, secondary, then now South African, and then Italian.
And who knows what happens? Yeah, what's going to happen next in the future? But that's some of the things we want to talk about actually on this episode is diving into some of the systems that you put in place to allow you to be able to work remotely, but also maintain that efficiency within your business. But as always, I like to start at the beginning. You said in 2013 you got into property, but just before that, what was life like? What were you up to before property?
So my job before that directly was market research. So I at one point worked in like the quant side, like project management, so like pulling together surveys for big companies. And then I moved into the qualitative side, which is more like focus groups, interviews, understanding consumers, and how people think, and helping big brands to then better serve them, improve their products, improve their marketing strategies with that data. So it was a really interesting job. But the problem is, and I come to see this more and more, I'm not good at being told what to do and not being the boss of everything. So I just got, just when you're beholden to other people and what they want you to do. And I've always railed against that, just doing something because someone else just says you have to do it is like the most annoying thing to me. And then before that, I was, my aim in life was always to be in performing arts. So I wanted to be on the West End stage. I wanted to sing and dance in musicals. But turns out that is a really hard life where actually also you're not in control of your own life, and it's even worse than other professions because you're just constantly auditioning for things and hoping that someone thinks you're good enough. So it turned out that wasn't actually, when it came down to it, something that I was good enough to do or was passionate enough about to really push through. So it's been a very weird journey to be here, moving into property, and now really being, I consider myself more of a business owner, entrepreneur. It's been not at all where I came from.
Yeah, I wasn't expecting the performance arts side of things when you threw that out. I was like, wow, from that to getting into property and being an entrepreneur and being in Cape Town right now, that seems like a very, very different life at the time. So how did you get into property then? Why did you decide to make the leap when you did?
So it did come back down to this thing of control. And for me, I love traveling. I've always loved the idea of traveling. Skiing particularly, just absolutely love it. And it was on a ski holiday. You might have heard this if you've been Googling me. We were on a ski holiday in 2013, and essentially it was amazing. And I didn't want to have to go back to work at the end of it. And I was like, there's got to be a way that I can have more control over how I spend my time, to be able to not have to work full time. Like working 5 days a week is hard, or more even. So it was that moment of saying, I want to be able to go skiing more, I want to be able to travel more, spend more time with my now husband, Dave. And it was that made me think there's got to be a better way. My mum and my stepdad, they had done like a couple of flips. They'd like bought a property and done it up themselves and sold it on. And then one or two of them they'd held on to. So I'd kind of seen them doing property, not in like a big professional way, but I'd kind of seen that. And so I thought, maybe there's something in this. And so I just started downloading books on property investing and reading how to do it. And that's really how it all began, all with that aim of, I want to be able to go on holiday whenever I want.
Yeah, it was about taking more control of your life from that perspective. And I guess, you've done well to again, we're going to touch on this a little bit later, but to not swap a job for another job is you've done extremely well, because we can get tied up in the own processes of our own businesses. But going back to that first investment property then, so you've read the books, you're really, you want to get back on those ski slopes as much as you can at the end of the day.
Exactly.
What was the first investment property exactly? And what was the plan with it?
So the first investment property it took me 18 months to buy the first one. And that was two reasons behind that. One was because I didn't have any money. So I had to get a second job and start saving up, and my car got written off and I didn't buy a new one. So I kind of like scrambled together a deposit, which was like £18,000, what I had to pull together in the end. And we were based on the outskirts of southeast London. So for Londoners, I'm sure you're like Woolwich, Arsenal kind of area. For those of you who don't know London so well, like not too far from the Millennium Dome. And so I started looking around there, first of all, for property investment. And I found a little pocket where you could buy flats still for like 80k inside London still. And so I was like, that's what I was aiming towards. When I eventually got to the point that I had enough money to apply for a mortgage for 15% of that, two things had happened. One, they weren't 80k anymore. They were like 100, 110. And two, the only person who would lend you an 85% loan to value mortgage was Kent Reliance. And allegedly, at the tender age of 24, I was not responsible enough to have a buy-to-let mortgage. And so I had to wait until I was 25. So in the meantime, property values still increasing whilst I, grow up a bit. And so I just started researching other areas. And so I started researching all the way out through into Kent. So from southeast London into Kent, till literally all the way along through like Dartford, Gravesend, Gillingham, all the way out to Dover, where I actually in the end had an offer accepted on a house. And before looking back again at that first area, not too far from where I lived, and going, why? Like the flat's at now £110,000 if I want to buy this. Is that really a bad deal? Or is it just a bad deal because of that comparison point that I've got from a year ago? And once I took a step back, I was like, actually, I feel it's a much better investment right now in this location, which was Erith in southeast London. So in the end, when I was allowed to get a mortgage, I moved back to southeast London in my head and in my search, and we bought the first property. So it was a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom flat, ground floor, in this little riverfront development. It was clearly quite nice at one point, but a little bit tatty around the edges. And the flat was just disgusting. It was, I don't think it had ever been hoovered once since it was built, and I think in the 80s. The carpet was just thick. Oh, it was gross. The toilet, I don't think had ever been cleaned either. So it was just needed a full refurb. So it was the first ever buy, refurb, refinance deal. The main difference was that I didn't have much money, so I was putting quite a lot of the refurb on a credit card, and therefore I was trying to get as involved as I could to save money. So I pulled up those carpets, I designed the kitchen, and just managed that whole refurb, got someone in to come and do the more skilled jobs, before then renting it out as a single let. Took about a month, 5 weeks for that first tenant to move in. So we did a really good job. It was my project management skills came out, and we moved that lady in quickly. And the brilliant thing about it was that we did the general standard of rental accommodation in that area, particularly at that time, was very beige to, slightly mouldy beige. And with this property, I was like, I want to just do it slightly better. So spend a bit more and get like a white gloss kitchen rather than one of the wooden ones, and a glossy counter, and put a nice little electric fireplace in. So I just spent a little bit more on the few features like that, and just made an effort to make it look really nice. And the agents in the area thought I would get maybe £600, £650 rent for it once it was done. When it went on the open market to rent, it was like on a Monday or a Tuesday. By the time the Saturday came, we had 30 plus viewings booked in, and people were coming from like East London down to it, and they were just like, there was just a huge frenzy. And in the end, we ended up getting £850 a month rent for that property. So it was like the local agents didn't believe me when I told them that difference, but it was just from just doing something slightly outside of what the normal market would be, and that's how it started.
As far as the first project goes, that sounds like a real success in terms of, I mean, most people seem to make a lot more mistakes. You must have done a lot of reading, like you said, to figure out
I definitely made mistakes, and I look at the mistakes now and I laugh at myself. We had this one thing with the refurb where the shower pressure wasn't enough, and so we needed to get a pump for the shower. And it was just turned into this massive thing. The guy who was helping out on the refurb was really hard work about it. And I just remember sobbing about this pump because I couldn't figure it out, and it was holding the whole thing up. We messed this thing up with the windows. Dave measured for the new windows we were going to put in, and measured it wrong, and so the window didn't fit, and I cried about that as well. So there was plenty of that kind of stuff going along underneath it. But yes, you're right. From a high level perspective, it went really well. I was really proud of the first go, and so it got and again, the valuation, I believed it should have got revalued based on the comparables at 130, 132. It got valued at, and this was 6 months later, it got valued at 125. I cried about that as well because I was like, I'm a failure, this is rubbish. But it was still, I'd still created an uplift. I'd spent £7,000. I bought it for 108.5. So I'd still created £9,000 or something when all was said and done. So yeah, overall it was good, but it wasn't without its tears
and challenges. No, of course, no. That on the whole, like you said, I still think an absolute success for the first project, and it'll be interesting to know how your strategy evolved from there, because you've gone from that 1-bedroom flat that you did, and now you're buying blocks of flats where you're buying existing flats, aren't you, particularly? But I wondered if you can tell us a little bit about the journey in between that. How did your strategy evolve? Because you didn't get there straight away, obviously.
No. The thing that we did best in that next phase was replicate. That was the biggest success that we had. Was for whatever reason, I managed to make a good success of that first project. And there's probably a lot of stuff that I'm not quite aware of that I did that helped it to be successful. But what we did next was we went and replicated it, and we did it pretty much the same thing again, another 10 times over the next 12, 15 months. And so the benefit of that was that we knew about that pump for the showers the next time round. We knew about the windows. We knew about the problem with the management company or whatever else it was. We learned the lessons, went and did the next one, and obviously there's be some slightly different mistakes, but every single one we were building on those lessons and just replicating it. So at one point, I think we had 3 refurbs on the go at the same time, with another 2 in purchase, and then refinancing it and working full time as well. It was totally bonkers. But the only reason that was possible was because it was replicating. And so because of that, we were doing pretty much the same refurb spec again. I'd already got a spec from the first one, so we just refined and used that again. So that was really, I think really phase 1 of the making of us. No, maybe phase 2 of making us in property. I should maybe break these down. But phase 2 of the making of us in property, because that really helped us to accelerate. However, in the meantime, we also start to find out that there are more than just books in property. There are property networking events and training courses. And so I started to get involved in these. And luckily that that focus train was already in motion, because what then started to happen alongside the purchasing of those properties was the focus started to really spread, and I started to get distracted by the other shiny pennies in property. You know, you learn about rent to rent, you're like, wow, I can make money without owning a property. Wow, why am I doing a single let when I could do a HMO because the cash flow is always better? Why not do a development? Why not do a commercial conversion? Suddenly I'm like a kid in a sweet shop. And so whilst we had a really good kind of, if year one was the setup year, year two was the buying 1 year, year three is the accelerating by replicating, whilst also in the background starting to get distracted. Year four, we hardly did anything because it was the impact of all that distraction, loss of focus, and we'll come back to it later, but also getting involved with investors too also fed that distraction and that chasing other options. So then we had a kind of a lull, which was off the back of that distraction, before we then realised that whilst that distraction was happening, the market had also shifted. So capital values had increased, which meant yields had gone down, which then meant that area that we'd started in, whilst it had done exactly what I hoped, I didn't realise by the plan going to plan, it would break the plan, and then we'd have to start in a whole new area or change the model. So that led us to having to choose a new area, do that same research again. That's how we ended up in Margate. And that's when we also wanted to evolve into something slightly bigger, like being able to do more units at any one time. And the opportunity was there to go and move to doing blocks of flats. Wasn't as linear as just going and finding, ready-made blocks of flats. Like we got into conversions and stuff first of all, which was another pain that we can talk about, before ultimately realising that our ideal model is just refurbs. We like to limit how many people we have to come into contact with, how many people I'm beholden to, planning, building control, conservation officer. Like these guys, I just don't want you in my life. I love you for other people, but I don't need you. So for us, it was about how can we maximise the control that the business has over the end product and just get rid of all the unnecessary people. And for us, refurbs are just very simple way to add value when you know how to do it right, and buying well and just keeping it really simple, as is always just the best thing. The simpler the better. That is as an overview how that's kind of evolved.
Yeah, it's so many questions come off the back of that. I mean, it's interesting that the replicating model made so much sense. And I remember I went through something similar when I was doing HMO. So I thought, oh, great, I found this. This thing's easy. Not easy, but like I can handle this and I'll just do it again. I'll do it again. And you don't factor in for the market changing and moving, like you said. And then all of a sudden that doesn't work, like you said, or it doesn't work in your area. And I guess that plus seeing what other strategies are going on, see what other people are doing, that doesn't help, like you said, the whole process. So I think it's really interesting that you said that you replicated as much as you could, but now you realize that things do change and you've got to adapt with it, but don't adapt too much, if you found something that works. And what's really interesting is that you tried different things and you looked at development, looked at conversions, but you found that, like you said, you didn't want to get too much involved into the planning side of things. You didn't want it because it slows things up. There's a lot more variables, I guess. But question off the back of this is, if you're not adding value through those conversions or building it or certain planning uplifts and things like that, then where does the value and how does it stack for you? How do you make your project stack?
It's a combination of, and this was for us one of the criteria of choosing an area. We had to make sure an area that we operated in, that you would see an uplift in value from a refurb, because not all areas, that's not necessarily the case in all areas. Like you might spend 10 grand and you add 10 grand. But so that was part of our criteria when we were looking for a new area. So being able to actually add value through it being in better condition, and that is relevant in Thanet where we are. And also, and this is where I think people, if you just need to have a bit of patience behind it to a degree, but it's buying well, and actually just having enough opportunities in your pipeline that when the motivation of someone is that I'd actually just rather get rid of this, and the highest price is no longer the most important factor to me, that's when we're there. And also being a reliable buyer, which obviously you only build that reputation up over time, so it comes back to pay you back in the future. But just being the reliable buyer, so maybe I'm not offering the most, but if I say I'm going to buy it, that I will buy it. So yeah, it's those two things really. Just making sure that we know what max price we can offer. We have to get it at a discount, and for us that buying blocks of flats means there's additional margin to be found through buying with because you're buying with investment value, but we refinance on aggregate value of the individual units. So that sounds really easy, but it's there's a lot of mechanics behind all of that. But the principle is simple, to make sure that can work. Plus adding value through refurb. We do reconfigure to add bedrooms, but the way that our blocks of flats get valued commercially doesn't add a huge amount of value to the building, but it adds value to the rent, so it improves the yield. Whereas if you're just doing we reconfigured a couple of one bed flats into 2 beds, and that did create significant uplift when we were being valued on more of a residential, buy to let style valuation methodology. So it's kind of, for us, it's always been a factor of a few different things. So buying well, adding value through refurb, and being in a good area for potential capital appreciation through the regeneration factors that are at play in that market.
No, and I think that's really interesting. I just want to dive into it a little bit more, just to simplify it for some people and for myself. So it's I get the point that obviously if you're a reliable buyer, if you're buying cash and you can buy with speed, you can put offers in that, like you said, not necessarily about the highest price, but you can move quickly. So finding those motivated sellers, they might be landlords even out of area. They just could be done with the asset. It could be a distressed asset. It's just not for them anymore. They want to move on. And with regards to, so you're buying a block as a whole, did you say you're remortgaging individually or at least based on the individual values of those flats? Is that what you were saying?
The second one, yep.
And then you're doing refurbs to make sure that you're like you did on the first flat, the same model, the first investment, you're doing those little extra things that are going to get those better rents and get that better commercial valuation as well, right?
Yep.
And so on that, I mentioned it in the introduction about you're trying to make renting better than owning for your tenants and customers. Tell us a little bit about that and how that works and how you do that.
Yeah, it's really interesting how this has come about, because I was definitely, we worked with an external letting agent until, let me get my years right, 2019. We worked with an external letting agent, so outsourced that. And that worked really well for a while, but as we started to grow the portfolio, when you're looking for those overall efficiencies, what we started to see was that there were, how much arrears really were starting to cost us when they hadn't before. Void periods between tenants were starting to really cost us. And we started to go, how can we make this operate better? And it took me about 6 months of being in Dave's ear going, we need to bring this in-house, Dave. We need to bring this in-house. We need to bring this in-house. So my business partner, he's like, I'm like the big creative forward. And he's like, whoa, I'm on my spreadsheet analysing. And so I push and he pulls. So about 6 months of me pecking him on the shoulder, and eventually he relented, and we brought it in-house. And it was really interesting because it was at a point that I was feeling quite disillusioned with property. It's hard, and we've been through a lot of challenges which we can talk about. And I was just at that point, I was like, you know what, let's just optimize what we've got. We don't need to be this epic property business. Let's just have a nice lifestyle property business, tidy it all up, and that's good. And that was just part of that efficiency process. But actually, whilst I was always like, I never want to manage my own properties, actually by bringing it in-house, that has been the thing that sparked a whole bigger vision for where we want to go. And so it came from the most unlikely place, but by bringing it in-house, we suddenly realised how much of an impact we could have in people's lives by taking real ownership of that property management. and realizing that actually, based on like the skills that we have in the team, we're really good property managers. Like if you know wealth dynamics as a profiling tool, we're very like steel energy, we're very systems focused. And so we actually set up something that was amazing. And suddenly, not only were our voids going down and our arrears just pretty much becoming non-existent, but also our rents were increasing by like at least £100, or if not £200, because of the not only the standard of quality, but also the whole experience that they were getting from us. So hey, look, we're still really early days with making renting better than owning a reality. And we've got the lettings team have created a whole strategy around how we're going to make this happen. And one of the things we're focusing on right now is that service level agreement for maintenance issues. So what are the different categories of maintenance issues, and how quickly do we resolve those, and how proactively do we communicate with tenants when that's happening, so that they know all the hard work we're doing behind the scenes. It's also been part of realising that as a self-managing landlord, there's not many self-managing landlords who are running it like a business in the way that we are. And so what we've realised is, for us, we were paying, let's call it 10% all in for our lettings, once you've taken into account tenant fees, etc., tenant find fees and stuff. So say we keep it at 10%. But for us at 10%, we're not trying to make a margin on lettings. We're trying to just make the whole portfolio operate better. So really, we've got more fat to be able to have more resource for that 10% than a letting agent ever could. So it means I've never run a letting agency by itself, but from what I've heard from other people, it's easily 100 properties plus per person, per full-time employee. Whereas for us, we're like 35 properties per full-time person. So they've just got the time to do a good job, to proactively be on top of maintenance, to put in place ways of doing things better, that a normal self-managing landlord, they're not necessarily interested in it, or they don't want to do it. A letting agent doesn't have the bandwidth to do that within that level of fee structure. Whereas us doing kind of both of those things together, it's like, it sounds so simple, but actually there's not many people really approaching it in that way. So there's loads more we can do, but it's just the start, really.
No, that hearing you explain it actually makes so much sense. And you're right. Not many people do it that way. Like you said, if they're self-managing, and this is just a traditional way of looking at it, you're trying to save on fees. You perhaps don't want to be spending as much giving it away to a letting agent when you can do it yourself. And those who want to use a letting agent particularly just want a complete arm's length. They just don't necessarily want to deal with that. But from what I'm gathering, and my own perception is, the challenge sometimes with having a letting agent who doesn't just deal with that type of property. I mean, your properties are all the same. You're on the ground. You know exactly who your customer is and what your properties are like and how they work. Whereas a letting agent could have a mixture of loads of different types of properties in different areas, because they're working and operating all within that town or other towns. So the property isn't exactly the same every time. So you can see how there is potential to make it more efficient, perhaps, like you've done.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, you've summarised it really nicely. And so therefore, by doing all of that, you can make it more efficient, so therefore you do it cheaper, but you can also do it better, and therefore you've got more bandwidth to do extra stuff. And so, making renting better than owning isn't for us about some sort of luxury accommodation, which is definitely a niche that you could do. Ours is like good quality, well looked after, well maintained properties. They're modern, they've got nice new kitchens, but they're not luxury by any stretch of the imagination. But they are well looked after, and our tenants are well looked after. And whilst we've still got a way to go to really make that vision a reality, like for me, I see with Tomes Homes, us ultimately having different investment areas with different properties where our tenants could move between different areas, but yet stay in the Tomes Homes family, which fits with our kind of ethos as well. But also it fits with the new generation that are coming through. We're the Uber, Airbnb generation. We rent everything and own nothing. And so therefore owning your own home, that's just because that's what all the Love to you all, but the old people told us is what we should be doing. Like, I don't own where I live because I'm like, I'd much rather have the freedom to be able to work in different places. If you're self-employed, you can move to different locations depending on where the work is. Like, that is the modern way. And so we are really just riding that, starting to be in a place to ride that trend as we grow.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. I mean, I've thought that a number of times where, as a property investor, I think that, I should be owning my own home. And I do, but tomorrow I wouldn't be against renting, if you know what I mean, because, I think it's Grant Cardone says it, doesn't he? Like rent where you live and own what you rent out. So that seems to make sense to me, because if you own your own home, you got to deal with all those problems you got to deal with, and there's no money covering it. There's no rent covering those problems. You've got to deal with all those problems. Whereas if you're renting and it's done to a good quality, it's someone else's problem. Someone else has to look after it at the end of the day. Jackie, I do want to move on quickly, and last bit on this section actually. So we're talking about the types of flats, the blocks of flats that you're buying and everything. What are a couple of your buying rules, would you say, when you're looking for these types of properties? What would you say are a couple of your rules?
Well, I think the first buying rule is what you've just said there, blocks of flats. The second buying rule is Thanet as an area in Kent. The second another buying rule would be all the utilities need to be split on those properties, having realised how much I hate Southern Water and EDF and all of those guys, and how much risk they bring. Those utilities have to be split. We have to have, for us, if we're going to buy to own a property, there would be a minimum of 4 flats in there. And if we're buying a property, because we have different investors that we work with. So we have some investors who are equity partners in what we do, who typically bring larger sums of money, so £1 million plus. We have some investors who just invest with us within our specific deals to get a better return. And then we also have investors who we source properties for a fixed fee. So we go and find a block of flats with say 4 in it, and those individual investors, 4 investors for 4 flats, and 1 will buy each of them. So depending on which version of that it is, there are some slightly different rules that we put in place in terms of the specific numbers. But those kind of rules that I've just said there are the universal ones across what we do.
No, that's great. And that just gives people an idea of some of the things that they should be looking out for, that they should have certain rules, and they will develop certain rules as they're buying more property or the more they get into this. And I want to move on now to, we touched on it earlier about there was a time where things started to get a bit tough, where you were doing potentially too many investment models or looking at too many different types of things. And there was an element of burnout. And this doesn't get spoken about a lot, I think, in property. And a lot of people can retract completely from investing. You might have stopped investing altogether, had it continued. How were you able to get through that difficult time?
I think I definitely had 3 burnouts. The first one was the worst. The second one was slightly better. Third one, I catch myself a lot sooner now, so they get progressively not as bad. I think that the first one was exactly like you said, doing too many things. And I think it's interesting when you start to get into property, and particularly as part of like wider networks, you're meeting people. It's like the energy and the excitement, it can become a bit of a frenzy. So for me, the way that we got through it, and this was really luck for me rather than design, but now I hope to try and design it for others so that they don't have to make it luck. But I happened to have a business coach who was the now husband of a really close friend from my research job. And he'd been watching me posting on social media, like, agreed another property deal, gone to another property networking event, another investor across the line, posting these things at like 11, 12 o'clock at night, me on a train coming back from somewhere, suitcase, like he was seeing all of this. And then as burnout was like starting to hit, I started to put some slightly more negative things on social media. And he reached out to me and he said, he started asking me why I was arranged to have a coffee with me just to see how I was doing. And he asked me like, how's it all going? And I just broke down because he was asking me like, why are you doing all of this? And I was like, well, it's because I want to go on holiday. I want to spend time with my husband. Like, I want to have a nice life. And it was so the opposite. Must have been 100+ hours in a week. And I was questioning my decision around doing all of it. You know, even though on the outside we looked very successful because we were suddenly going from doing 1 deal in a year to doing like 10+ deals in a year. And he just started reminding me why I'm doing it. And when I looked at my life, it was like the opposite of why I was doing it. I think we went on a ski holiday not too long after or around that time. And we just worked the whole time, you know. We skied a bit, but it was always like, got to get back and do something, got to work. And with Elliot, he just really started the process of reining us in. And he was great. He was a business coach. He wasn't a specific property person, but he just started asking us to view the decisions we were making through a different lens about being in line with what we actually wanted when we started. Subsequently, we went on to go and work with his mentor, who did have more experience about property. So he was able to rein us in even more. And then based on what he's taught us, I've learned to rein myself in even more and learning what exactly focus means in property, because it's different to other sectors, like how you find that focus. So for me, getting over burnout was about starting to say no, accepting that you shouldn't be at a networking event like 3 or 4 nights in the week. You don't have to try and work with every investor that says they want to work with you. You don't have to analyze every property deal. So I think if I had to summarize it down to one thing, it's about saying no based on what you actually want, not what the world around you is telling you that you should be doing.
I think that's so powerful what you just shared there, and I really appreciate it, because I think a lot of us go through that, but no one talks about it as much. I've certainly got to a point where it was resonating so much with me when you said you're going on those holidays and you're working. It got to a point where when I first started in my development company, I was going on holiday, but my laptop was the first thing I was grabbing, and my wife was like, "What are you doing?"
Like the sunglasses.
Yeah. What is that guy? This isn't right. This isn't working. And going back to what you said about saying no, you have to have really refining and have really clear goals again, right? To be able to do that and know that, like you said, this networking event up here doesn't do anything for the types of properties I'm going to look to do, or this type of focus over here, that investor is going to cause me more problems than I need. I don't need that extra investor. Refining and looking back at things like that is really important. So what are some of the questions you ask yourself from that perspective? No.
In terms of choosing what to say no to?
Yeah.
I think the way to think of it, what I've developed over time is this ability to say, what is the cost of saying yes to this? So here's an investor who wants to invest in HMOs. I don't do HMOs, but I could do HMOs. Okay, so I'll work with them because they've got some cash and we can make some money from it as well. But then once you've done that a few times, you realise you end up going down this rabbit hole, spending proportionately, you're the wrong side of the 80-20 principle, if you know what I mean. So you put the amount of hours that you put in versus the results that you get, it's not, you're in no way heading up that compound effect graph. And just starting to realise the cost of diversifying. People think it's the best thing since sliced bread, diversifying, but I just see what is the cost of diversity and diversifying too soon. Definitely in the long run, it's great to have multiple income streams. But if you try and set up multiple income streams too soon, you just have a load of rubbish income streams, all generating you less money. So it's just starting to see as well from a systems perspective. Every time you make something more complicated, it's harder to systemize. And if it's harder to systemize, it's part of you. It's going to be a job. You're going to have to do it. So for me, I'm always thinking, how much harder will this make to put a process in place? And if it's going to make it too much harder, we don't do it. It's not a science, because sometimes it does make sense to do something new or to adapt. So it's kind of just developing that. How does this fit with what I ultimately want? Okay, I ultimately want to be going on holiday and I want to be having cash flow coming in to support that. Okay, so why do I need to do HMOs as well as blocks of flats? Okay, I actually don't. If I just do more blocks of flats, it gets easier every single time. Someone can help me more every single time, and I get to the end result quicker and easier. So I don't know if that's an exact answer to your question, but hopefully it's useful.
That certainly makes sense, because what I'm grasping from the way you're explaining is about refining that strategy, and I do want to come on to that now. Is the property strategy side of things and your business from that approach. When we think of strategies as investors, typically we're thinking about those labels that we all know, those models of rent to rent, HMOs, lease options, service accommodation, whatever it is. But you're talking about the strategy of the actual business, not the model itself. Is that right? Is that how you're looking at things?
100%, great summary. So the dictionary definition of strategy is a plan designed to achieve an overall aim. So what is your overall aim and what is your strategy to make it happen? And I call the things like rent to rent, service accommodation, those are business models. So it's an important thing to know, and that really feeds, as you call them, rules. I call them deal criteria. That your business model informs your rules or your criteria, and then that we build the whole strategy around all of that, around like how you source those deals, how you find investors, how that's going to operationally run, how you manage the finances, how you build the team. Like, that's strategy.
Perfect. No, that's brilliant to look at it from that perspective, because like you said before, when we get into property, we're not looking at it as a business all the time. I certainly wasn't. Even though I came from a business background, I was looking at it as, oh, this is just an investment strategy. This is what I do. And before I know it, I'm so intertwined with all the processes. I haven't taken myself out, and I've just created another job for myself. And going back to going on holiday and working while you're on holiday. And it's the opposite of what you were trying to do in the first place. So by having these systems and processes and that strategy refined, that's allowed you to be in Cape Town right now, to go skiing for 10 weeks in a year if you want to. What are some of the systems and processes that you started to put in place? Maybe a couple that you can share with us.
So I think the first, actually, let's keep coming back to this thread because I think it's a good one. So you choose what business model is going to make the best sense for you and what you want to achieve. Then you decide what your criteria is around what deals you're going to specifically do, so that you're niching down what your focus is. What that then allows you to do is start to very early on put systems in place around your sourcing. So let's focus on sourcing. So if you've got a deal criteria, it is going to help you to, for one, you could get a virtual assistant based on that deal criteria to start searching Rightmove for you. And based on that predefined criteria, if it fits X, Y, and Z, take that property, put the details of it in this place, whatever system you're using, could just be an Excel spreadsheet to start with, put the details in there, and then you can go and have a look at that predefined list of stuff that meets your criteria and start to interrogate it further to start to analyze it. So that's like a good first step around the sourcing. Same on the investor front as well. If you're wanting to work with investors like we do on deals, then you'll also have an investor criteria. So you know what market you can really help in terms of which people with money do you want to serve, and how does what your deal criteria and your business model does, how is that going to help those investors to get what they want? A better return on their money, diversify from stocks and shares, a pension pot, whatever it may be. And so then refining what that criteria around investors is and what that process is from someone saying, I'm interested, all the way through to doing the FCA compliance, all the way through to them investing in the deal through like heads of terms and contracts. And it's also about what investors come to you that you had that initial conversation with, and they're like, Jackie, really dead keen on some HMO deals in Margate. Can you help me out? And I'm like, no, sorry, that's not what we do. Or can you go and source me a commercial conversion? No, that's not what we do. And that ability to say no at the early stage on that side is also part of a process, because you're refining who's actually coming in to that pot of people who could be investors. And then by having that clear pipeline process for investors, Ultimately, you can then get support. Again, administration is obviously a really good place to start. There's a lot of paperwork that's got to be done. Not a lot, there's some paperwork that has to be done around FCA. So being able to send someone to help you send that out through Signable for someone to be able to sign remotely, or to type up some notes for you from an interview that you've made. So hopefully that's two examples of how that starts to come to life from like cascading down from the vision.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that goes back to looking at things as a self-managed landlord. I was thinking that as an example, because people, like you said, you've got all this admin work, and people thought, well, I'll just do it myself because, I don't need someone else to do that. I want to keep it lean. I want to keep this bootstrapped. But then you've just taken up all your non-renewable resource, which is your time. You can't do anything with that. So instead of trying to save on that, it's how can you make it more efficient? Can you free up your time by outsourcing that admin work, giving it to someone else and refining it, but still keeping an eye on the processes? And I guess question here, by keeping an eye on the processes, there has to be some sort of metric, I guess, some sort of KPI to know whether you're on the right path and it's working. What are some of the metrics that you have within your business and other businesses?
So there's loads actually. So one could be how many consult calls we've had with investors this month. A more operational one is revenue yield. So revenue yield, if it was 100%, that would mean 100% of the rent that you could have received was received. So i.e., no one defaulted on their rent, there were no arrears, and there were no voids. So our target for revenue yield is 97%, because you're always going to have some gaps between tenants when you're doing refurbs, that kind of thing, to bring it up to scratch for the next person. So our target is 97%. So that's like an operational one. We also have a KPI around how much time we target from a tenant leaving to a new tenant moving in, and that's different depending on if there is a refurb required or not. So we report on those things, but yeah, they go across the whole business. But it is hard to get to the right KPIs. I've recently read there's a book that's come out recently called No Rules. It was written by Reed Hastings, the Netflix guy.
Oh yeah.
And I've really enjoyed it. Really different way of thinking about how you manage a team. And one of the things that he was saying is a KPI, you've got to be really careful, because if you can quite easily target the wrong thing. So they were saying with Netflix, they were pretty clear that new subscribers was their target. But actually, and he was about to put that as a KPI for one of his team members, when that team member came in and said, actually, what we need to focus on now is retention. It's not about new people, it's about holding on to them. So if he'd have put the KPI around new people, they would have been targeting completely the wrong thing. So I'm trying to find the balance between tracking KPIs, but not necessarily putting too much emphasis on that being a target for someone, because they literally evolves all the time. Like a year ago, there was like 6 of us in the team, 6 or 7. Now there's 12 of us. And so it constantly shifts who exactly is doing what processes at what stage, and what KPI is best to track that. So in a way, it's good to have the numbers and start to build them up, but don't try and do it perfectly, because you'll be disappointed. It's just got to be kind to yourself.
No, but I guess you'll never have the time to monitor those KPIs and tweak them if you never took yourself out and have that system or process in the first place. And that brings me actually on to tweaking, and the fact that, yeah, you monitor the measurements, but you tweak them where they need to be to make sure they're still on track. It's a never-ending process from what it sounds like, but it's certainly going to be better than not doing anything altogether. And in doing research for this sit down, I was listening to some videos that you've done on pivoting your business last year during the uncertainty of all that was going on. And unfortunately, that uncertainty is very much still here, and it continues. So what were some of the pivots and tweaks that you were looking at in your business, or that other people should potentially consider with theirs?
Really good question. So the main tweak that we made, because for me, the biggest risk as I saw it was the institutional lending. Particularly last year, we're not quite sure what's going to happen, like to the banks. Are they all going to survive? like what's going to happen if the market, the market's going to take some sort of correction at some point. Like, how do we keep operating even through all of this? So there's kind of two approaches that we have to doing deals. One is that we buy a block of flats with vacant possession. We do a refurb straight away. We buy it on bridging finance, and then we refinance it within 6 months. So our latest project, we refinanced after 4.5 months, but we bought that on a bridge. That was something that we agreed pre-COVID, but we decided to follow through with it in the end because we felt comfortable. But it basically meant there's this period of time that you're on bridging finance that if the market shifts, that's where I'm like at my most nervous. Like what happens to the end value? What a rate's going to do? And so for us, we decided that it cannot be our primary focus at the moment. So the main pivot that we took was take a slightly longer view. So buying properties where you've already got tenants in situ and take just a longer approach to refurbishing the individual units, and more like over a year. Which means that we're purchasing on term finance from day one, so like buy-to-let style finance in a commercial world. So it's still like 4.5%. So it's still not as cheap as the buy-to-let world can be. But it means for us that we've just got that certainty on that fix. So we've got a fixed rate loan for 5 years from day one. And so if the market takes a tumble after 6 months, that's fine. We can ride that out because it's going to be a cash flow positive property. So that's okay. But if the market takes a tumble and we're on a bridge and we've got to get off the bridge, we're into a whole new world of complexity and banks not doing what we necessarily want them to do. So that was the main tweak, just having a longer term view, having a bit more certainty around the rates that we were on, and just not rushing it in quite the same way that we normally would. Having said that, I don't think... Go on.
No, I was just going to say that is an absolute great example of a tweak that you made. And like you said, you might not be able to do things as quickly, but you eliminate that variable in it a little bit more, a lot more at the end of the day. And I wonder if is that something that you've learned during this time that you will continue to use going forward? Maybe not on every deal, but it's kind of like some of them that way, some of them this way. I don't know. Is that something that you're considering in the future?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think it just opens up. It opens up a new section of flats that weren't so relevant before, or wouldn't really fit the criteria before. I think it's a really nice model. I don't really like risk. Like I like certainty, and so if it's just one less factor, I hate bridging finance. We once got stuck on a bridge because the solicitors didn't understand planning consents, and so we were on a bridge paying a couple of grand a month, and we couldn't get off the damn thing because they didn't understand the planning laws. And then we had a planning consultant tell them this is how the planning laws work, and they went, "We don't agree with that." Well, that's because you're a solicitor, you're not a planning consultant. So that for me, I was just like, I just saw firsthand how it could feel being stuck on a bridge for whatever reason. And, we were lucky that, the market was pretty solid. It didn't take a dive. But if it's been bad during that time, just kind of give me a glimmer of how things could be really bad. And I think bridging finance definitely has its place. If you feel pretty certain about the market, you've got a good model for getting in and getting out again, I think, it's definitely got its place. But for me, I'm quite cautious, really. It might not seem that way, but I am.
No. The more actually I speak to more experienced investors, that the more you realise that they're not these risk takers that you think they are. They are a lot more calculated than everyone gives them credit for. And even during those good times where the bridges are working and things are working, you're not resting on your laurels. You're thinking, right, that in another time this could go a different way. How can I mitigate against that? And I find the great investors are constantly looking at ways to mitigate the risk, because it goes back to those KPIs and measuring. How well can you measure something if you don't know what can go wrong within it and you're not looking at those things? And I'm trying to be mindful of time. We've only got a little bit left. I've only got 2 more questions, and one in particular was, I have to bring up crystal ball time. Do you have any thoughts on where the market is going this year? Perhaps even where the opportunities are?
So for me, I actually think, based on the fact that the banks have continued to lend, and the amount of so I think the banks are in a better place following the last recession anyway, but also bring into that how the government support that's come in. There's a lot of liquidity in the market, which we didn't know how that was going to go when the lockdown first came. And I think that for me has been one of the main factors in feeling more confident. There's a lot of liquidity there, and particularly the more established banks, they're pretty solid and they're actually feeling pretty confident too. I do think there is some kind of correction that will come in, but it's nowhere near the pits of doom that we were sort of talking around back in like March, April time. So like 5-6% is what I think will come at some point. But then if you look at where we were, and I'm talking about like pre-COVID prices, we've actually had like I think it was 7% rise last year according to Halifax. So actually, if you're looking at pre-COVID as your benchmark, then actually you're in quite a good place in terms of probably isn't even going to go below that in my opinion. So I think that liquidity is really good, and I also think where inflation will have to go. Coming off the back of all of this to erode the value of the debt that the government has taken on, that rates are going to be kept artificially low, but inflation is going to have to tick up a little bit. So actually, property as an asset class, I think, is a really good place to be, especially if you're leveraged, because that inflation is going to erode the value of that mortgage debt over time, and the rates are going to stay low, which means the cash flow is going to be good. So I think, for me, the mid to long term outlook for property, I'm feeling like I'm happen to be in the right place at the right time. Touch wood for the first time, and maybe in my life, I don't know.
Now that seems to make a lot of sense. That approach and that analysis, like you said, if they're printing in my mind, if they're printing all this money, where's it going to go eventually? Inflation and trickle down to tangible assets. Property seems to be like one of those tangible assets, like you said, in the mid to long term. But you're better at the figures than me, so that's why I asked you. Jackie, last question, just to your final thoughts, really. Having run your property business for a number of years now, having done different types of projects, I wonder, what were your biggest lessons and takeaways from the projects that you've done? What can you share with us?
I would say that like bigger, more complicated, sexier projects are not necessarily better. And for me, questioning, is this actually going to help me do a better job of what I'm trying to achieve? Or is it actually a bit of ego? And I think if you can strip away the ego and say, what's the result that I'm looking to achieve, and how does this help me to do it? And to just look, particularly like the creators of businesses, like we don't like to think about the risks, and we're just starting to look at some of those. You've called them variables. I think you've come back to this quite a lot. Like, how can you just minimize those variables? Because the more variables, the more complexity. The more complexity, the harder it is to systemize. The harder it is to systemize, the harder it is to achieve your vision. Let's leave it there.
That's absolute brilliant way to end it. Jackie, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on with us today to hear about your property journey, those ups and downs, the tweaks and pivots that you've had, and how systemizing and strategies have helped you create the business that you really want to be in and help improve the efficiency of your business and your clients' businesses. If people want to find you, Jackie, where can they go?
So we've got two websites. So we've got tomeshomes.com. So if you're interested in like the investing that we do and want to know more about that, check out Tomes Homes. You can send us a message through the website. Property strategy, property-strategy.com. This is if you're looking to get educated on how to do property investment, the systemized approach to doing more deals, raising more finance, creating more cash flow. That's what property strategy is all about. So depending on what you want to reach out for, either through tomeshomes.com or property-strategy.com, and you can connect with me on social media, join our newsletter. We put a lot of content out on social media. So if you kind of like my vibe, subscribe to the newsletter, hook up with me on social media, and I'd love to hear from you.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much again, Jackie, for your time, and hopefully we get to catch up again soon in the future.
Thanks so much, Raj.
Cheers. Thank you.